answers to Senator Hume, you haven't finalised your program yet.
No, we have not. We are just commencing
for 25-26.
That's right.
Okay. So another program that's been flagged as a possible determination to investigate is CHSP, Commonwealth Home Support Program. Is that on the program or
That's on the card.
not?
It is on the 24-25 annual audit work program as a potential audit,
Okay.
but we haven't commenced that audit.
So you haven't commenced
We
work on
haven't.
that?
No.
So is there an intention to commence that program? An audit on that program?
So typically we have about 100 potential topics,
Yeah.
and typically we do between 44 to 48 performance audits. And if we haven't started it by now, it's not moving yet until we settle the next program.
So it's on the radar, but you haven't started an audit on it yet.
That's correct.
Does it do those projects that aren't picked up as part of your actual program get rolled across to the next cycle, or what's the process for picking up something that's already on the radar but we haven't got there yet?
They can roll forward to the next cycle. It's not an automatic process. Every year we'll take a look at a range of factors in determining what goes on to the potential audit list. We'll look at the risk that's involved in the topic, the impact, so the potential actually to lead to improvements in public administration. We'll look at the importance in terms of the priority that's placed on it by the Parliament. We'll look at materiality. We'll look at whether it's possible to audit. Sometimes there are practical constraints that mean that it's difficult to progress with an audit. All of these things are taken into account. And then we also cast a lens to make sure that there's a balance across the program by portfolio, by size of entity, by theme, just to make sure that we are getting an adequate coverage across different issues. Depending upon the outcome of that, it is very possible often topics do roll over from one year to the next, but it will be up to, it'll be a matter of the outcome of that process.
So given that it was on your program for this financial year, why would it not have started so far? I mean, what is it about this that, I mean, you've effectively said it, if it hasn't started now, it's not starting, so
Well,
why?
it won't start this financial year because we're running out of financial year, Senator.
No, I get that, but
Yeah.
why wouldn't you have started?
It's competing priorities in a small office. As I say, 40 to 48 from about 100 topics. And even within the health portfolio, we've been doing other things. We've been auditing the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, for example, huge audit. We're in Future Fit program at the moment, which is a slice of the home support program. So it's on to get on the program. It's got to be something that we think is worth doing. But then spreading that 40 plus audits around 250 entities, it hasn't come up to the top yet.
So looking at, say, Future Fit, which was due to be tabled in this month,
Yeah.
and that's now been punted down the road a bit. What's the reason for the delay on that program? And I suppose the next question, does as you say, the Future Fit is a slice out of CHSP. Does that inform the priorities for what you might do in respect to CHSP?
So Future Fit is the audit's coming to its close. I think we're expecting to table that in April. How does that happen? Sometimes it's hard to get evidence. Sometimes it takes a bit longer than what you forecast when you planned. Sometimes your staff have leave. So that one we're sort of scheduling for April. Does it inform the home support program to an extent? We're obviously having a look at how the Department of Health manages the Future Fit program as it stands and what its thinking is across home support. But when and if we get into home support, it will be a deep dive into that very important program.
And so you say when you get to home support. So it
I said when and if.
Well, I'm just trying to work out whether it's a priority or not.
Well, it's a priority because it's on the program, on the annual audit work program, and then it competes with other risks, and other risks are not just in health. They're in defence, they're in tax, they're in Services Australia, they're in DSS. They're right across the board, and the availability of the right team at the right time to do the work, and with those sort of characteristics that Dr. McLeish has outlined. But it's on the program. It's of interest. It's rolled forward onto the next draft. We haven't dropped it. We're interested in it.
So you can't give me a specific reason for the delay of the Future Fit program report?
I think Future Fit was evidence, wasn't it? Timing on Future. Oh, it was leave. It was actually leave. These are very small teams that conduct these audits over the sort of 10 to 11 months. One person going on leave just could put a dent in it. Unexpected leave, I might say. So that one's moving through for tabling April.
So going back to, okay, so it was a leave issue.
Yeah.
In relation to Future Fit.
They're mostly either evidence, so pace of evidence provision by the entity, or staffing in our office.
So in the context of CHSP, there's about 800,000 people on CHSP. It's a program that supports a lot of people.
Yep.
And been subject to a reasonable amount of scrutiny. So your answer is that it remains on the program, but your program fall of the next financial year is yet to be finalised?
It has rolled over onto that program. That's a big call onto the draft. So we haven't dropped it for next year yet.
But you haven't finalised
the draft.
The new program
That's
yet.
right.
It's still in draft form.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think Senator, the size of the program, the impact it has. I mean, Dr. McLeish has run through the sort of 5 or 6 key things that we think about. It's a good program to audit. It's got big impact. It's got a lot of providers involved in it. We see, always see issues around good management of providers who then on-serve. It's got all the characteristics of auditable and interesting. And so far it's made it onto the draft. Okay. But we could not sit here and promise that it will be the next cab off the rank in health.
Okay.
Thank you, Senators. I do believe that concludes questions for the Australian National Audit Office, and I want to thank you for your work. I've certainly found it very valuable this year. I'll just let officials know that we're now waiting for the National Australia Day Council, after which we will move on to the Department of Finance. I don't expect we will be long with the National Australia Day Council, so while I am flagging to those listening that the Department of Finance and the Minister, it would be great if they can make their way up. We're not expecting Australia Day to go for long. Thank you. I welcome the National Australia Day Council. Mr Fraser, do you have an opening statement this evening?
No, thank you, Senator.
Okay. Senator McGrath, Senator Hume.
It's only 5 minutes.
Thank you, Senator McGrath.
What was the total amount in funding provided to community groups and councils for the 2025 Australia Day activities?
Thank you for the question, Senator. Mark Fraser, Chief Executive Officer of the National Australia Day Council. This year in 2025, the total approved budget for the Community Events Grants program is $4,855,000.
So that was the total budget. Was that full amount provided to community groups and councils?
Yeah, in essence it was, Senator. There have been a couple of those organisations that cancelled once funding had been approved, in the order of 2 or 3 out of 400 applications received.
So of the 400 applications that were received, how many were approved?
There were actually 500 applications received.
Okay.
And 400 were approved as a result of a merit-based selection process.
Okay. In relation to the community events grant program, which would be a component of that, what was the total amount of funding provided to organisations under the community event program for the 2025 Australia Day activities?
Yes, Senator, that's the entire program. Has an approved budget of $4.855 million for 2025. That's the entirety.
So that's that. So what about the capital city events, iconic events? Is that a separate program?
Yes, it is a separate program, and so that funding totaled $4,373,000 in the 2025 for 2025.
Okay. And how many, along a similar line, how many actual grants were supplied, and how many applications were there for grants?
This is in relation to the capital city funding. Yeah. So that these are our iconic capital city grants. So that's one in each capital city, and so there were grants this year in all capital cities, barring Hobart. So 7 of the 8 capital cities had funding grants approved for this year.
Okay. Do you know why Hobart didn't?
They didn't seek a grant, Senator. They were approached and provided the opportunity like all states, and they didn't take it up.
Fancy that. How very unnationalistic and patriotic.
Very un-Tasmanian. In terms of your... the Hobart City Council is not run by the Liberal Party, so I think it is. Anyway, it's certainly not run by the Liberal Party.
I said Liberal government, the state.
It is a Liberal government. The state are doing a very good job. In relation
Perhaps
to...
you can tell us, Mr Fraser, were they state or Commonwealth, local government or state government agencies that put in for those?
State government grants, Senator, in the large part, and there are a couple of independent organisations that are part of our national network in 3 particular states. The others are state government entities.
Maybe Senator Colbeck can explain why the Tasmanians...
So, while I have the call, with all due respect to everybody...
Sorry.
So, can you provide details, including the amount of each grant provided for these capital city events / iconic events? Because there's only 7 of them. Could you do that now, if that's possible, please?
Certainly. So in Sydney, that's the largest one, given the nature of the national events that take place at the Opera House for Australia Day Live and associated events, $1.5 million. In Brisbane, $298,000. In Adelaide, $750,000. In Perth, $475,000, Darwin $650,000, Melbourne $250,000, and in Canberra $450,000.
Okay. That's all the... just check. I think that's all the questions that I have. in relation to the National Australia Day Council.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr Fraser, for your attendance this evening, and thank you very much, Minister, for the day that you have spent with us.
Great pleasure. Chair? Good, wonderful. You can suspend just for a few minutes
Yes.
to get there. Thank you.
We can. We are suspended. Minister Farrell is ready and waiting. Senator the Honourable Don Farrell, Special Minister of State, Ms Jenny Wilkinson, Secretary, and other officers of the Department of Finance. Minister, you have an opening statement this evening.
Chair, thank you for the opportunity of making an opening statement, but given the lateness of the hour and the fact that I think we're running a bit late, I'll choose not to make a statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Wilkinson.
No, I don't have an opening statement.
We'll go straight to questions. Senator Hume, I presume you're seeking the call.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I want to ask some questions in relation to the pre-approval process for claims made by parliamentarians. Oh no, hang on, before I do that, I want the staffing table. Sorry, Minister, I almost forgot our regular rendezvous with the staffing table.
Yes, here you are. Thank you. I've got mine.
Oh, terrific. May I have a copy?
I suspect that's not the first time you've seen it, Minister.
Well, Senator McGrath, in fact it is.
Just while everybody breathes in the staffing table,
Thank you.
I might move on to some questions about the pre-approval process for claims by parliamentarians, if that's all right. Obviously, this is the process by which we might use the department to provide that initial view of a piece of communication or a claim for our expenditure before we commission it, to make sure that we don't make any mistakes, make sure it's within the business regulations. So I'm after just how long has the department been running this service for parliamentarians?
Senator Sally Bectus, Assistant Secretary, Business Enabling Services. This service has been running for approximately 12 months now.
12 months, okay. And have there been issues identified with the service?
Not in terms of issues with the actual service, Senator. We are getting very positive feedback in terms of the assistance that staff are providing, but there may be some questions with regard to some of the specific information and working through, going back and forth for some clarification on some of the process, some of the information that's coming through that staff are assessing. But in terms of actual problems...
So the process is working well, but the outcomes are being occasionally...
Case by case, we will work through it, yes.
Okay. So when the department established the service, given it's providing expert advice, did the department seek any legal advice on how to interpret PBR regulations and then advise parliamentarians how they can claim?
I'm not aware of.
No?
I'm not aware of.
No legal advice?
Specific.
Senator Shannon Fraser, First Assistant Secretary, Business Enabling Services. And in terms of establishing the service, we have a number of employees who are very familiar with the Act and how and the regulations and how it operates. So there was in-house expertise.
So you've got in-house legal advice on how to interpret the rules?
We have a legal branch which we can refer to, and we often do through.
So interpreting those rules there has been legal advice sought, or is it a case-by-case basis?
It'd be on a case-by-case basis. These regulations and rules have been in practice for a long time, and as I say, we have a number of staff in the department who are very familiar with them. And
are they lawyers?
Case, some have legal backgrounds.
So they are qualified to interpret those rules?
In my opinion, Senator, yes.
Okay. Who's made the request for legal advice to interpret the rules?
Sorry, Senator, if you could just ask that question again.
Who has made any requests for legal advice on how to interpret those rules? Is it?
As I say, Senator, we work quite closely with our legal branch, and so there'd be
so it's just a
common
constant thing.
interaction.
You are constantly seeking advice with your legal branch on how to interpret those existing rules that have
on a
been in place for a
case-by-case
long period of
basis,
time.
yes.
Okay. There are other agencies that offer similar services for parliamentarians. Are you aware of any other similar agencies?
I'm not, Senator, no.
Like IPEA, perhaps? IPEA does a very similar task, it just does it with different kinds of expenditure, isn't it?
Oh,
yes, Senator. Yeah. So it provides advice on the viability of a claim, and then they have a safe harbour provision in their legislation. I'm wondering if you have a similar provision for the advice that you provide.
No, we don't, Senator.
We currently do not.
And why is that?
It's just currently not in the framework.
If you're constantly checking for legal advice, how do you ensure consistency in the message rather than just having one firm, this is how we interpret the rules?
Sure. Senator, I think just to be clear, we're not constantly checking for legal advice on every matter that comes through. Finance's role, as you already know, is we are responsible of administering the PBR framework, where the obligations and Finance's role, as you know, is to ensure compliance within the Act, and we work through the dominant purpose and all the various aspects of that, specific specifications and so forth. So in terms of consistency of advice, I think, the normal framework is what the team work through. The time where we do seek legal advice is if it's sometimes quite borderline. The team may be unsure, it might be something different. The environment is constantly changing with technology evolving and so forth. So if there's something different, we will get legal advice. But essentially, in terms of consistency of advice, the team capture all this information when we provide advice. If there's anything quite contentious, we have a risk register. So there is a process that we do undertake as a team. We spend a lot of time going through as a team where if the information is a bit the team member assessing is unsure, they will escalate that, and we will do a peer review. We have a number of processes in place to be able to work through that. So
perhaps if I could just offer, in addition to that, Senator, there are a number of common scenarios that the team are used to handling and so are very familiar with, and they would be your more business as usual type assessments. But then there are more complex and unique assessments, and that's when you would seek additional help.
I think it's the business as usual assessments are the ones that I'm trying to draw you out on. So just for instance, let me just draw your attention to a number of recent decisions that have been made by the department on what could and could not be claimed. Now, my understanding is that in previous years it's been very unremarkable for items that don't reference the claiming parliamentarian to be claimed. So material could be provided to the office that isn't labelled Senator Jane Hume, provisions for the office, PEMS paper, whatever it is, and that can still be the case, yes? You can still claim those things.
Sorry, Senator, could you repeat the question?
Well, let me be very clear. There have been some claims relating to communications that have not been approved on the basis that they don't refer to the parliamentarian.
Who's claiming the expense?
Is that right?
So it'd be difficult to go into specific circumstances.
All right, well,
because
booklets,
in these scenarios, like context does matter. So it's difficult to give a generalised statement or assessment in relation to specific cases. More than happy to talk to you about specific examples.
Well, I think that my office in particular has raised these issues with you quite recently, and we still haven't got a necessarily satisfactory answer. So let's say a booklet that may be completely informational, or a policy document from the Parliamentarians' Party. Are these items not covered by the same provisions as those other items that might be listed?
Senator,
so they have to have my name attached to them.
Senator, if the team work through the overarching obligations on assessing whether it is for the dominant purpose of your conducting your parliamentary business, and they do look at the various aspects of that, and dominant purpose being one of them, as well as things like the duty stream that actually aligns to, whether it's for parliamentary, electorate, party political or official duties. They do go through each of these steps and assess whether that is for your as in the parliamentarian's own parliamentary business. And
so does a piece of communication need to refer to a claiming parliamentarian?
If the communication actually is clear that it is for the parliamentarian's own parliamentary business, and that is quite overt, yes, there are cases where we have had applications for assessment where it might be multiple parliamentarians, and cost sharing is another aspect of this, and we will look at the weighting of the information, look at value for money. So we do, but ultimately it's justifiable by the parliamentarians to ensure that what they've put forward meets all of these criteria.
So only if it's for the dominant purpose. If it's the dominant purpose, is that right?
So going back to the framework, you know, members and parliamentarians need to be able to satisfy themselves that they do meet all those obligations under the framework. Dominant purpose test is one of them, value for money, and also acting ethically and in good faith and being willing to publicly justify the expense. And the role of the pre-assessment team is to try and help senators and members comply with those obligations under the framework.
I'm advised that the department's previously taken a position that paper, for instance, something as basic as paper, provided for a single parliamentarian, can only be used by that parliamentarian or that parliamentarian's staff, so that a single piece of paper used by another office might be a contravention of the PBR in the eyes of the department. Is that your view?
Senator, I'm not aware of the situation that you're referring to, and as I've said, I don't think we can go into sort of specific cases here without knowing, you know, all the detail of what was of a situation. So happy to deal directly with your office on that.
Senator,
Sorry,
Senator, can I just jump in? I think so. You know, we have, partly responding to feedback from parliamentarians, tried to provide some more assistance. I mean, as you know, the PBR framework is a principles-based framework. Parliamentarians can make their own judgments about what are the things that they think that are for the dominant purpose of their business.
So it isn't a pre-approval process? It isn't a pre-approval system?
You don't have to get pre-approved, I do not believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think you don't have to be pre-approved. We're trying to provide assistance to those parliamentarians who are looking for more guidance. If it's not working, if you've got feedback about it, if you feel like you've got a different view about
about what's, the feedback you're getting from the department. We're very happy to hear that feedback and to work through those issues.
Okay.
But
it's the inconsistency, I think, that has been the problem here. It takes... So, all right, for instance, let me just give you an example. There was one item of communication that was initially denied because the communication could have provided a commercial benefit through what was considered advertisement to a business. Now, I want to understand what the threshold of providing a commercial benefit through an advertisement is. If there's a photograph of me standing outside a coffee shop saying, this is my favourite coffee shop in the mornings in my electorate, is that an advertisement?
Senator, as I've said, we're happy to work through the cases with you in detail. The part of the pre-assessment process, and it's not a pre-approval process, it's to help senators and members work through if there are any issues, to make any adjustments to ensure that obligations under the framework are met. Take your feedback in relation to consistency, and we will continue to work on that. And happy to hear other feedback. Senator.
Well, I mean, the feedback is that we've tried to work with you through these things, but this seems to be a consistent problem, which is why it's being raised here rather than offline. Do you think that the service that you're providing now is consistent with the service that parliamentarians were receiving a year ago, 18 months ago, 2 years ago?
The service didn't exist, did it?
There was, I believe there was always some form of pre-assessment service, but it's only in the last 12 months or so that we've been quite active to help parliamentarians. It's almost more of a bookend, if you will, Senator. It's more to provide assistance and guidance before claims are submitted, because there was a bit of an issue of claims being submitted, and then there was some contraventions identified. So the service in the last 12 months, as I highlighted, has been we've invested more resources in that context. But
So we've had pre-assessment for more than a decade, and this doesn't seem to have been a problem in the past, but it seems to be a consistent problem now that we have raised over and over again. The example that I gave you about the advertisement, for instance, that was a pub.
Hume, I've always received the advice that was outside the guidelines. So
terrific.
But I had presumed that advice was indeed consistent.
So I'll ask you some questions when you're sitting over there.
No, I'm just interested in the same answers.
I just want to ask, the circumstance that I'm raising on this advertisement was we were, the parliamentarian, and it wasn't me, was accused of advertising a pub. And it was accused of doing this because the pub's address was listed on an invitation because that was the event's location. Now, somehow, that was considered an advertisement. Is it seriously the department's view that listing the address of where people should go cannot be done under the PBR without breaching it?
Senator, when the team are assessing claims that are coming through in the pre-assessment process, and when they are looking at these the submissions, there's a number of factors that are taken into consideration. In a particular case where it may not have been, and again, case by case, not every case is similar, so I think I should factor that when we talk about consistency. So the issue in this particular scenario would not have been about the actual pub. It would have been about the size of the picture and how much the picture framing encompassed any commercial advertising type material. So if the focus was more on the picture there, and also the narrative, and how that is positioned. So from a commercial,
there was no picture of the pub on the invitation.
So this is the difficulty with trying to provide advice without having all the circumstances and details. So as I've said previously,
I think that's what's causing the confusion with parliamentarians, is that things that they have always done in the past somehow seem to be a breach of the rules now. So if I want to hold a community forum at a cafe, if I name that cafe on that invitation for a community forum, it's not a fundraiser, I'm not charging anybody anything, is that advertisement, would that pass the PBR test for you?
That would pass the PBR test, but
a pub doesn't?
With the pub picture, if
there wasn't a picture, it was just the name of the pub.
So I'm happy to take this offline and we can talk it through. But Senator, with a lot of the feedback that we had received over a period of time, both positive and negative, constructive in terms of how this is working, we did develop some commercial purpose guidance and material, which is also on the website. That does also provide a checklist in terms of what you can work through. We did also, in that guidance, provide some examples of photos as well in terms of what does qualify as a derivation of financial gain or reward, which is ultimately the definition of what commercial purpose and how the team are interpreting that.
How would a parliamentarian get commercial gain or reward from holding a community forum at a pub?
So, Senator Grant Lovelock, Acting Deputy Secretary, Business Enabling Services. I think we're not saying that listing the address as the venue of a location would be interpreted as giving commercial benefit. I hear that you are aware of advice that may have suggested that on that basis the pre-assessment service suggested that artefact wouldn't be compliant. We'll take on notice the way that teams interpret commercial purpose and dominant purpose in these contexts. I think part of what witnesses are trying to highlight is that there will be a range of factors on any one piece of material that's produced that may be considered, and it will be that range of factors on any given piece of material that influence the outcome of that pre-assessment. The pre-assessment has been put in place to support members and senators to comply. What we are aware has occurred since the pre-assessment service has existed is that often what is provided as part of the pre-assessment service naturally shifts a little as documents are produced, and what is the final version of that document may shift. But we will take on notice how it is that we consider commercial purpose and dominant purpose in the context of making that
Has there been a change of practice? I mean, forget taking on notice. Has there been a change of practice?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator, but we will take that on notice in terms of considering whether the guidance in terms of what has been considered in the past and what is now being considered has changed.
So does the department really think that a business being mentioned in whatever form in a publication that is within the terms of what my colleague's talking about does provide a commercial benefit? I tell you what, no cafe or pub is going to have lots of people come to it because they've ended up in James McGrath's newsletter. I think you need a reality check here. This doesn't happen. If anything, my experience is, because of the ugly nature of Australian politics at the moment, is that businesses that appear in politicians' publications actually are targeted by trolls and damage is caused to them. Okay. So does the department take that into account?
Sorry, who?
Senator, we do look at incidental references as well. So it's not as Mr. Lovelock and Ms. Fraser mentioned. There are various nuances that are taken into consideration. Incidental references absolutely are permissible. It's not something that we will cross out. It's when it's repetitive, it's prominent. And as I said, there's factors that the team actually work through.
I can tell you, it's not the experience of politicians across this parliament. Because I'd get you, if there was a publication that effectively was a newsletter that publicised my local pub on every page, I would get that. But if there's as my colleague was referring to, that Senator Hume is having a politics in the pub meeting, they get refused because of the approach taken by the department. We don't think you're being reasonable. And that's why these questions are being asked here, because we're not getting satisfaction through the other mechanisms.
Perhaps we just ask the Minister whether he'll undertake to fix this problem as soon as possible.
I'm happy to undertake that staff task. But I have to say the issues have been around for a long time, and the issues that you refer to are not new issues, and they were issues that, you know, I've personally encountered under previous administrations, but I understand the problems, and
you are absolutely then the man to fix them.
Well, look, I inherited lots of problems in this job, Senator, and I've tried to do my best to fix all of them.
Oh, you're the Harvey Keitel. You're like the cleaner of the Parliament.
Is that Reservoir Dogs? Oh, God.
All right, thank you. I have some questions about PEMS implementation. The last time we were here, you said that the department had undertaken a benefits realisation review of PEMS following the ANAO report into the system, but that report hadn't been completed. It has been completed now?
Yes, Senator, that benefits realisation review has been completed.
Great, okay. So it was supposed to be completed at the end of 2024, so yeah, we can tick that one off. You've undertaken to the committee to provide us a copy of that report as well? That was the last estimates?
Yes, Senator. We're happy to provide a copy of that report.
Senator Alex McKellar, Assistant Secretary, Business Enabling Services. Last session, Senator, you asked if we would provide to the Minister for consideration. We've done that, but certainly happy to take it on notice to provide to the committee.
Right, so you can't table it today?
Don't have it here today, Senator, but can.
Is it available online? Is it publicly available?
It's not publicly available at this time, but we can take it on notice to provide to the committee.
Okay. Yes, please, if you could, because you did undertake to table it last time when it was ready. So let me then just ask what you found as part of the process.
Just one moment, Senator. So, Senator, the PEMS project benefits review, as you say, responds to the ANAO recommendation. The review documents the extent to which each of the project benefits that were defined at the start of the project and their respective measures have been realised. The overall benefit realisation result was that of realised partially, which we think was a fair representation of how PEMS went in the context.
Partially. I'm not entirely sure what that means.
So if you put it in the context of some of the other external reviews like the ANAO report, Senator, it's certainly not a glowing review or a glowing result. So it was the sum total of, I guess, how the measurements were taken and it was partially achieved, not fully realised or anything like that.
Okay. So what's the recommendation? After that review is taken, what is being done to implement change to improve?
So, Senator, as part of the change in governance and way of working that was introduced ahead of the release of Milestone 8, that different way of working and a commitment to identifying the benefits to be released through future releases of PEMS is the focus, and for the governance committees to be clear how it is that benefits will be realised through this next phase of PEMS enhancement.
Yep.
And tracking those benefits as put, recognising, I guess, Senator, that going back to the commencement of PEMS and closure of that first delivery, as we now focus on post several reviews of the platform, what it is that we now prioritise and focus on ensuring we're able to deliver to support parliamentarians in conducting their work, that those benefits are identified and tracked from this point forward.
Okay, so they're that's the recommendations. And is there sort of a time frame for delivery? Are there sort of specific KPIs? What do I ask you next time I see you to say, how are you going?
So, and I'll get Mr McKellar, we've got now a clear picture of the range of releases we will do to deliver enhancements to the platform, and that is what we would track in terms of benefits. Do you want to just talk that through?
Sure. So going forward, Senator, we have a project that was stood up at the start of this financial year to run for 2 years. As part of that project, we will have a number of measures against the enhancements that will be delivered in that project. And at the conclusion of the project, there will be another assessment based on those measures as to how those enhancements, how effective they've been, and the success of the project.
Okay. So can you just tell us, just give me an indication of what those enhancements might be?
Well, I could take on notice the specific details. We have we have 17 grouped work packages of a number of enhancements to deliver over the 2-year period as an indication.
What will a user see that will make it different for them?
Yeah, absolutely.
So overarching, those enhancements are actually about making sure we prioritise that sort of end user client experience.
Yep.
So that's sort of the overarching intent behind the work packages in terms of specifics, Mr. McKellar?
Yeah, absolutely. So we certainly, as learning from the original PEMS project, we took on board the greater need for consultation about what was required and what would reap the most return. So far, we've delivered 6 of the work packages to January 2025. And examples of what we've delivered so far include improvements to the bulk certification of claims, which enables the ability for parliamentarians to certify multiple office claims at one time, and with their office managers then able to progress those claims in PEMS. We've introduced the automatic removal of staff authorisations when staff cease employment, so that reduces the risk of security issues there. And we've made improvements to the level of automation of the processing of overseas travel. Looking forward to, there's some example of what's already in play.
What's done, and then what's coming next?
Coming forward, for example, we've got efficiencies particularly for office managers and parliamentarians in accessing information and processing claims. So a lot of front-end changes that will be visible to office managers to help support them more efficiently and effectively process their claims. In the reporting space and the reporting tool for budgets, additional information and fields within the office budget usage report to support the identification and reconciliation of office expenses. So we've had a lot of feedback around making that capability more user-friendly. So that's something that we've got coming up, and in fact that's due to be deployed this month. In terms of office claims and transactions, we have improvements to office claims processing, including the ability to make amendments more easily to reduce the number of returned claims that are seeking correction. So instead of just returning a claim and bouncing it back, there'll be better capability to amend that claim.
Excellent. All right, so when we next meet, if I say, have the changes been made to the front end, to the user interface, to office expense reconciliation and improvements and amendments to office claims, they should be done by the next estimates?
So we have a schedule to complete, as I said, all 17 work packages through to June 2026. So I can provide dates around individual items that we have locked in so far. If you'd like me to take that on notice, I can provide you.
I'm guessing the next estimates, and I'm only guessing, is probably about October.
Yeah, so by the end of this year, in addition to the 6 that have already been delivered, we expect to have another 7 done by, we're planning for December this year. So in between now and then, yes, we'll be able to provide you with an update of how we're progressing.
Okay, terrific. Thank you for that. And finally, I think I have just a very brief question on, this is probably for the Minister, on the Government Staff Committee. Minister, in previous hearings, you provided some confirmation that the government had a staffing committee. You confirmed its membership. Can I confirm that the membership of the committee hasn't changed?
Correct.
Excellent. All right. Can I also confirm that this body still performs the role that's linked to the Statement of Standards for Ministerial Staff?
Yes, that's correct.
And at previous estimates hearing, I also asked you how that statement of standards for ministerial staff applies to government staff, and asked if the management of these standards would transfer to the PWSS for management. You've said that they won't.
Correct.
Right. Could I ask if the standards will then be enforced by the new IPSC?
I don't believe so.
Okay. How will the IPSC, if at all, then interact with the new government staffing committee?
Well, that's a subject for discussion.
That's why I asked it.
And I'll be discussing that
Right.
with my colleagues and the Prime Minister.
Okay. So there hasn't been any consideration of how it will interact with the government staffing committee?
Not with me yet, Senator.
Mm-hmm. Can you envisage a situation then where an issue might arise that both the IPSC and the government staffing committee might seek to deal with it? And if that's the case, how would that work?
I'm hoping the behaviour of the ministers is such that we never get into that situation.
Wow, if that were the case, then we wouldn't need a government staffing committee or standards for ministerial staff or an IPSC.
Senator, I'm going to
one day
call shortly. Are you?
Yes.
I did just note you were turning the page. I'm presuming that's to another set of
that's
questions.
Fine. Thank you, Chair.
All right,
Thank
Senator
you.
Waters.
Thank you. Can I just ask us, Councillor, to turn the volume up a bit? I'm not catching everything everyone's saying. Thank you.
I think it's just noisy air conditioning.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. Thank you. Good evening. Hi, Minister. Hi, folks. Thanks for being here so late. I'm not quite sure if I'm asking this in the right spot, so but I'll give it a crack. I'm interested in whether or not free legal advice is captured in the current definition of gift under the Electoral Act.
I'd be more inclined to think that that would be a topic when the Electoral Commission came, unless somebody at the table thinks that would be...
best a question for the Electoral Commission. They're on next.
Oh, great. Lovely. I've got some other questions for them as well.
Generally speaking, the Electoral Commissioner brings their lawyer, and I'm assuming that is the case on this occasion, and they are full bottle on all of these topics.
Great, thank you. Well, something that hopefully is in the right spot, is free legal advice required to be disclosed under House Interests Register rules? I only know about the Senate rules because I'm a senator, but I'm asking about the House rules, which I presume they have.
We're not responsible for the House rules. I think
Who would know the answer to that? I know for the Senate it's $300 and above. I don't know what it is for the House.
So I think it would be the parliamentary departments and probably the chamber department are responsible.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I can go no further then, I'm afraid. I'll try to get some help out of AEC.
Senator Colbeck.
I just want to ask some questions around the new documentation, online documentation for employment of staff, and it's part of that whole new system that's being implemented, and I'll acknowledge up front that we're still learning the system. But it relates to the accessibility of the forms. So, having had a very stable staff and not having employed anybody new until a few weeks ago, when I went to access the form to sign up a new staff member, it's all online and it's password protected behind a password that only I, as the Member of Parliament, could access. And on that form there are a number of declarations that the staff has to make. So I can't fill this stuff out. What are your preferences for your superannuation?
Yes,
and there are a number of declarations on there that the staff member has to fill out. And I get that you're trying to, well, there's clearly a desire to protect the data and the information, but protecting the form from anybody else, I actually don't get. And I can't fill out declarations on behalf of my staff. I'm very, I'll say I'm old-fashioned. I like to sit down and sign the contract and retain a copy of contract in the file, and we're in a digital world and all of that's all different now. But the fact that I get an email from the system says create a new passcode to get into the documentation to employ a person. Here's a 9-page form which includes declarations the staff member has to make, but only I can access the form through a protected password process. I don't get it. I seriously don't get it. Now, I did send a grumpy email back through to MOPS or MAPS or somebody. I didn't get a response, but I don't know, I'm not sure if anyone actually read it, but it just doesn't make sense to me that the way that the system is working, because it's certainly not there to help me. I can make the system, I made the system work. I had to sit down with the new employee, prospective employee sitting beside me and ask him the questions, but I fail to understand how I can verify or certify his declarations, her declarations, on a document that only I can access.
That not making sense makes sense to me, Senator. Yeah. I'll just see whether we're able to answer now.
Yes, and I've not been made aware of those issues, but obviously yourself and the Chair have had issues. So I think the best I can do there is to take that on notice and come back to you with it does not sound like an efficient process, so we'll just make sure that operates effectively. So I think the best I can do is just take that on notice.
Yeah, I mean, so employing a new person is something where both parties have to input into the documentation.
Correct.
But both parties have to be able to access it.
Yes.
To be able to do that and transmit it, to be able to do that.
Your comments sound reasonable, Senator, and I'll undertake to look into it.
And we'll come back on the correspondence you've had directly with us to explain what's going on there and how we can support you to...
I've expressed very similar views to the ones I expressed, perhaps even more succinctly in the email, but I would have thought that access to the document would be relatively free, so I could say to any of my staff or a prospective staff member, but particularly my staff, go to the website, access the form, email it to the prospective person, and then it can be transmitted through the system to me.
Yeah. Without knowing the details, Senator, I can't comment, but there's probably privacy concerns in there that people are trying to manage. But
I suspected as much.
But it seems to be inhibiting the process as opposed to...
It was pretty deep when even I had to get to access the form. I had to create a new password to get in to the system. It was a couple of steps too far to achieve what people are trying to achieve.
Yeah.
So, Senator, we'll take that on notice and for the benefit of the committee come back, but also then come back specifically on your correspondence with us.
The person's safely employed, I might add now. We fixed it, but...
Pleased to hear.
I didn't need the process.
Okay. We would like to thank the Department of Finance for their attendance this evening, and thank you for your support to our officers. And I will now ask the Australian Electoral Commission to come to the table.
Chair, I note that we were supposed to break at 9:45. I'm happy to push on, but it's up to you.
Well, how about we... Oh, it is 9. How about we just take... How long do you think you'll have with the AEC?
Probably about half an hour.
Less than 10 minutes, maybe in 5 minutes.
I think we should probably break for 5 minutes then, if that's the case, so that people can take a very short break, and we'll be back. Are you undertaking, Senator Hume, that we might finish 10 minutes early if we deprive ourselves
I'm
of tea break?
absolutely not.
Well, then we will
I'll do
suspend
my
for
best.
15 minutes and take the proper tea break. CEO of IPIA will stay, but that the other officers are released. And I'd now like to welcome Mr. Pope, Acting Electoral Commissioner, and other officers of the Australian Electoral Commission. When's the election going to be, Mr. Pope? No, I wish you would. I know that is not something you could. If you could tell us, if you knew, you couldn't tell us anyway. But I just really joke when I say that, other than to say we're all looking forward to it, I'm sure. Do you have an opening statement this evening, Mr. Pope?
No, I don't, Senator, other than to say I have no answer to your opening question. I have no clue.
I was not expecting that you would, but I'm sure you're ready in any case.
Indeed.
Senator Hume.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to questions 49 and 50, which I had on notice, which were regarding Mr. Rogers' announcement that he was not going to, that he would see out the end of his term, on what date that would be. He came back and said the 16th of August. So I suppose, Minister, my question is probably for you, or potentially Commission. You might correct me. How long is the process to officially appoint a new Commissioner, and what are the steps involved in doing that? I'm not entirely sure. Am I directing that to you, Commissioner, or Acting Commissioner, I should say, or am I directing that to the Minister?
I think the Acting Commissioner would know a lot more about that process than I do, and I'm happy to refer to him.
Senator, I think based on past processes, so it's advertised openly, selection panel is formed with very senior members of the Australian Public Service. Selection process is undertaken, and then it goes through the normal approval process to get through to Executive Council. And I think normally it's 4 to 6 months.
4 to 6 months.
From start to finish.
So if Mr. Rogers gave his notice on the 16th of August 2024, that's nearly a full 4 months warning, Minister. Is there a reason why the government didn't use this time to complete the appropriate processes to make a new appointment?
Well, we followed the pattern of previous Conservative governments in terms of the processes that we've followed in the way in which Mr. Pope was appointed. The proximity to the election was obviously an issue, and of course not knowing exactly when the election was going to be. The government has the greatest confidence in Mr. Pope's ability to conduct this election in the very highest standards of the Australian Electoral Commission, and the process of the replacement will, get fully underway as soon as the election's out of the way, and I'm sure that we will later this year be reporting on the completion of that process in a timely fashion.
Thank you, Minister.
I mean, look, I suppose the point I'm making is the Australian people have nothing to worry about in the way in which this process was conducted. And as I said, I and the government have got the highest confidence in Mr. Pope and his team to conduct an election at the highest standards of Australian Electoral Commission elections.
As do the opposition.
Excellent.
Can I ask Mr. Pope, at the last estimates you stated that you were hiring 130,000 temporary election workers in the new system. Is that 130,000, is that the total number of workers that you'll be looking to hire ahead of the election?
Senator, I think that may have been the number of workers that we actually had in the system at the time.
Right.
We are looking to fill 100,000 positions and hire 100,000 people to fill those positions, and we're making very good progress against that.
And of the 100,000 people, have they sort of pretty much got a standard job? What is it that they'll be doing? Are these the people that work
they'll be doing,
literally in each one of the booths on election day?
They'll be doing a whole range of activities, Senator, from working in a polling place and doing all the different roles that occur in a polling place, from working on mobile polling teams, remote mobile polling teams, or our count staff. So there's a whole range of activities right across the country, and we are actively recruiting, and once the election is announced, our advertising and recruitment will escalate even further, and we look forward to filling those 100,000 positions with very high quality people.
You referred at the last estimates to a new system that you're using to hire temporary workers. How's that currently operating?
Really well. Really well, and we've been fortunate enough to be able to use it in a limited way, but put it to the test for the Torres Strait Regional Authority election, which we ran late last year, and the system is performing incredibly well. We've had 130,000 people, if not more now, register in the system. So
that's the 130,000 that you were referring to.
That's right.
Registering.
That's right, and I hope that we actually get up around 250 to 300,000 people registering in the system to help us fill those 100,000 positions.
And this new system, is this the QR code, come and work for us for the election? Is that what that is?
Yes, and there's a registration process on our website. So
right.
Anyone who wants to work for us, go straight to our website and follow the steps.
Okay. And what stage are you at in developing the materials relating to an election?
Everything's done, Senator.
Oh, gee, that's organised. Have you completed the identification of all polling booths and pre-poll locations?
Look, pretty much. We're going to have 7,000 polling places and I think around about 570 or 580 early voting centres, which is a huge undertaking. Now, of course, whilst we may have identified where we'd like those polling places to be, and we will have done initial contact with them, until we actually know the date, we can't lock them in.
Oh, that was my next question.
And we can't.
Wonder what date you'd booked all those venues for.
We have not. I wish we could, Senator, but look, we do sort of effectively what we call sort of soft contact, if I can put it that way. Are you interested in being a polling place? Do you think you'll be available between sort of March, May? What's the likely fee going to be? And we go through all those sort of processes, but no offers are made and no leases are signed until a date is known and announced.
Okay. Mr Pope, you'll be aware of recent media reports of up to 12,500 new Australians being created as part of a rush of citizenship ceremonies conducted by the government. You're aware of this?
Yes.
Yes. Have you, having worked on a number of elections in the past, can you recall an instance where there was such a significant number of new citizens created on the eve of an election?
What's wrong with that?
Surely you must support that.
Surely.
As many people as possible.
It's a shame that Hansard doesn't pick up a tone of voice.
And they're going to get it granted, why would you want to preclude them?
It wasn't asking Mr Pope whether he objected to it. Chair, I'll ask you the questions when you're on that side. Sure, I wasn't asking Mr Pope whether he objected to it. I was just asking whether it had ever happened before in his many years of experience running elections.
Not in the 12 years of my experience, Senator.
12 years. How does the AUC manage an influx of new voters like that? Do you have materials or programs for new citizens to help them voting for the first time?
Well, we have a range of things. So for new citizens, there's two ways in which we go about this. Standard citizenship ceremonies, we have a range of material that is available for people to enrol. So it's a QR code, we have fact sheets in up to 37 languages, and Home Affairs and councils provide that information at citizenship ceremonies for people to enrol. Those that don't enrol at that time, we get the data from Home Affairs and we put them through the federal direct enrolment update process. So if we don't pick them up on the day, then we pick them up in the following months and we get them on the roll that way. So that's sort of for your standard citizenship ceremony. Then we have policy position around attending iconic citizenship ceremonies where we will actually send staff to those larger ceremonies. And our staff do exactly that. They effectively promote, here's a material, here's a QR code. If you've got any questions about how to enrol, come and ask us.
I went to a citizenship ceremony in Frankston on Australia Day, which was lovely, and I spoke to the AEC workers that were there. They were sitting at a desk in the corner. I went up and said hello and just asked them how they were going about their business, and they were doing a terrific job. The stories that we are hearing of the recent citizenship ceremonies, that there is an active recruitment process, that there are AEC staff wandering around the room getting people to sign up. Is that a different approach?
Oh, not really. I mean, we attended 217 Australia Day ceremonies all over the country for about 16,000 electors. And I think it just depends on the size of the crowd. So in large crowds, we'd be asking our staff and expecting our staff to be mingling between the crowd and trying to promote our resources to get as many people to enrol on the day as possible.
Do you have a sort of a ratio? You know how many citizens are going to be sworn in on a particular day, so you send a certain number of staff?
Yeah, I don't know the ratio off the top of my head, but that would be a discussion and a decision that we would make in consultation with our state managers who generally manage those staff.
And how do you find out about the ceremonies? Is that through the Department of Home Affairs or is it through another way?
Through Home Affairs.
Through Home Affairs. Okay. And do AEC staff attend all citizenship ceremonies? Is it standard practice or is it really only the ones of a certain size?
It's more just as the latter there, Senator, so it's more the iconic ones and the larger ones that we attend.
Right. Okay. What's the sort of threshold?
There isn't.
Isn't one?
There isn't really a prescriptive threshold, but you could probably take the description of iconic relatively broadly.
Okay. I'm advised that at least at one of these ceremonies, one conducted in Adelaide, attendees were allegedly approached by AEC staff from seeking not to sign up as on the electoral roll, but expressions of interest to work at the upcoming election. Does that sound accurate?
That's news to me. No, I'm not aware of that.
I've been provided with photographs of the material that was provided to the attendees. It's a business card and it appears to be authorised under your name, and one side it says Federal Election Jobs and on the other side it has a QR code and a web page saying aec.gov.au/election jobs. Are you aware of that material?
Look, that material does exist, there's no question about that. We are looking, as I said, for probably 250 to 300,000 people, and we are looking for people who also speak foreign languages to come and work in polling places. So it is quite possible that...
So hawking for jobs at citizenship ceremonies is standard practice?
It could well be. It could well be.
Could you take that on notice as to whether that's...
I'm happy to take it on notice, but I'm actually...
What a good idea.
I'm actually quite happy that that's been occurring, Senator. We do need more people who speak foreign languages to work in our polling places. So these are new citizens, they're eligible to vote, assuming they're on the roll, they're eligible to work for us, so it's a good practice.
How do you think you'll go about that process of educating new citizens about how to go about voting, and then at the same time having them working on the polling places?
Well, and in a number of different ways. So we actually are running at the moment community education sessions for cultural and linguistically diverse communities and also Indigenous communities. In fact, depending on the timing of the election, we're hoping to run up to 500 of those community education centres, community education sessions, and we've already delivered over 300. So we are doing community education in many different languages right across the country, both called languages and Indigenous. But in addition to that, of course, Senator, for anyone who works for us, there is training that is provided. There's training in our system, depending on the position that you're in, and there's also training provided on the day, so it will depend on the role. So we're very confident in our ability to not only recruit, but also to train people to do the work that we ask them to do.
Okay. I want to ask some questions about the remote area mobile polling program for the upcoming elections. Obviously, you engage with communities to determine the locations you visit as part of that program. That's correct, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. And the locations have to be 20 kilometres from the polling place, from a polling place, I should say. Is that right?
Generally, I think.
At least?
At least, yes.
Okay. Has the AUC identified the locations that you'll be visiting as part of the RAMP program?
Well, once again, Senator, we've certainly got a good sense of where we'd like to go, and my understanding is, we are looking at hoping to attend, potentially up to around 480 different locations, which is actually an increase since the referendum.
Is it an increase since the 2022 election?
Yes, it's quite an increase since the 22 federal election by probably more than 100.
Wow, okay.
But as you'd also appreciate, Senator, we're currently dealing with a late onset of wet season in the far north. We've got a potential cyclone off the Queensland coast. We've got an extraordinary heat wave in Central Australia. We don't know exactly what sort of weather conditions we're going to be dealing with during that 2-week polling period. So this is one of the most challenging elements of election delivery, is trying to navigate through those things that we just simply cannot control.
Is that why RAMP runs for more than just the pre-poll period?
Well, it did for the referendum. The legislation allowed for it to go for 3 weeks.
Right. But not
for the
an
election, it'll be back to the 2 weeks.
Back to 2 weeks.
So we're actually doing more in less time, which is a bold and challenging undertaking, but we are going to give it our best shot. But the one thing we cannot control, of course, is the weather and access to communities. And we are concerned at the moment, if the election was to be held soon, we're concerned at the moment about challenging access to a number of communities in Northern Australia.
Can I ask, you engage as part of the RAMP program some staff on the ground. How does that occur? Is it ad hoc or is it pre-arranged? Do you have set staff that you normally call on if you're going to take it up by another 100 polling places?
Well, it's a little bit of both. So, we work, our RAMP delivery is done in partnership with Services Australia. We would not be able to deliver this without them. So we employ some Services Australia people. We have AEC people who are core parts of the team. We have 90 community electoral participation officers who are all Indigenous officers that we are employing. I think we've up to around about half of those have been employed. They are local people from communities who speak language, who can help with not just education and awareness, but can also help in identifying other people that can come and work with us. And I think we're going to be looking for around about 270 local assistants.
270. So they're ad hoc. There are some that are pre-arranged and there are some that are ad hoc.
That's right.
So if you have some that are ad hoc, how do you make sure that those staff, particularly if they're sort of gathered together at the last minute, how do you make sure that they understand the non-partisan nature of the work that they're doing?
Well, that's a critical part of the recruitment. In fact, we don't recruit anybody who can't give us and can't sign an undertaking with respect to their impartiality. And then, of course, we provide them with appropriate training to reinforce those principles.
And how do you access all the locations? Do you charter transport for that?
Well, it's a combination. So we'll be using, boats, planes, helicopters, whatever we require to get into these communities. So, yeah, some of it's chartered flights, some of it's helicopters, and a lot of it is four-wheel drives, which I think during the referendum we travelled over 200,000 kilometres during that period to deliver the remote service. So it's a huge undertaking, incredibly logistically difficult.
To a typical RAMP location, how many staff do you send?
Well, again, that will probably depend on the size of the community that we're trying to service, but because some of these are actually very small, and others you've got 200, 300, 400 people. So we send enough polling teams to try and service the communities that we're looking at.
So if you had 200, 300, 400 people, how many AEC staff compared to a community of, say, 50?
Look, I'm going to say probably...
Just approximately.
Probably 6 or 7 for... Probably 6 for the... I might
for a larger
deputy
community.
to maybe correct me on this.
Sure. Senator Kath Gleeson, Acting Deputy Electoral Commissioner. So on a standard remote voter services team, we have 4 staff.
4.
and that is, the number of staff that can fit reasonably comfortably in vehicles with all of the material that they have to carry. And then to deal with larger communities, we would poll there for a longer duration. So we may end up staying there overnight and polling into the second day, for example. But as a general rule, it's a team of 4.
And I know this sounds very strange, but first of all, how do you secure the ballot boxes or ballots counted on site?
So they can be counted on site or counted back at a central location in a counting centre, depending on the team and where they're operating. They are secured in the same manner that ballot boxes are secured in polling places, with seals and seal records and scrutineers viewing opening.
Right. So how do you have scrutineers in a remote community?
We do have scrutineers that attend remote polling and have in the past. If a scrutineer isn't present, then we'd have the seal opening witnessed by a member of the community, for example, or a member of the public. And those records are signed in the same manner that they are for polling places.
Okay, so you actively sort of do a call out for scrutineers. How does that work?
So if we needed to break a seal, we would typically look for someone who is independent, preferably a scrutineer. If there's not a scrutineer available, then they'd ask someone who is in line to vote or someone from the community who's willing to do it.
Right. So one of the AEC workers asks somebody in the line.
Yes,
whether
potentially
they'd be willing to witness.
That could be a scenario.
Right.
We also, Senator, publish the schedule in advance so that parties and candidates have the opportunity to try and plan to have a presence where that's required.
Okay.
Senator Hume, I'm due to rotate the call.
You can rotate the call. I've got another line of question that I'd like to follow up, but yes, that's fine.
Senator Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Hi, Mr. Pro. Thanks for staying so late, 10:15, to answer our questions, and also for a very busy time coming up for you and your team. I wish you all the best. I have a series of questions. Firstly, under the Electoral Act, how is free legal advice treated? Is that captured in the current definition of gift?
Senator, it would possibly depend on the circumstances. Do you have any more circumstances or facts that you're able to share?
Yes, the Leader of the Opposition has been getting free legal advice, I'm informed, from Arnold Bloch-Liebler. So I'm interested to know whether the Electoral Act has any views on that.
Again, I think it's going to depend again on the facts, but my sense is, as a broad principle, it's likely to be considered a gift.
Okay, and so it would be required to be disclosed by the Leader of the Opposition and by the law firm?
At the appropriate disclosure time, yes, that would be my sense at the moment. But again, I'd need to know the exact nature of the legal advice. And
would the content or the topic of the legal advice change your answer?
it could, yes.
Oh, okay. Can you elaborate on that for me?
Well, I'm assuming it's not personal legal advice.
I don't know, but I also assume that would be outside of the realms of the Electoral Act.
That's right. So they're the sort of circumstances that we'd need to be aware of.
Okay. And is there anything in the recent changes that were passed by the Parliament that would change that scenario?
Well, Senator, I've memorised that there's 25 exclusions to the definition of a gift from the new legislation, but I can't say I've actually memorised all 25 of those just yet.
Oh, you'll have to do better next time.
So I wouldn't mind a little bit more time to actually come back to you on that.
Okay, thank you. Well, if you could take on notice whether the changed definition changes your view on whether the legal advice would need to be disclosed. Yeah. Thank you. Now, I've got just one other quick question. Under the current laws, but also does the recent reforms change the position? Should free modelling, for example, by Frontier Economics on nuclear, should that be captured as an in-kind donation?
I think, once again, Senator, I'm going to need to understand the full facts of what's being provided there.
Well, I understand
to be able to answer that question.
I understand it's modelling on nuclear by Frontier Economics that the Coalition frequently refer to. That's I don't know the detail of the modelling. I'm not sure how detailed it is, to be honest, but it's provided for free. So would that need to be disclosed?
Possibly. Again, it's subject to the circumstances, which we would need to understand. It may well be a gift that needs to be disclosed at the appropriate time.
Okay, and what would be the circumstances that would require disclosure?
Look, I might ask my chief legal officer to.
Thank you.
Well, I think he's already delegated that to Ms. Reid.
Joanne Reid, Assistant Commissioner, Disclosure, Party Registration and Redistribution. So, yes, as the Commissioner has explained, it really does depend on the circumstances and what the legal advice or advice is being procured for and who has obtained the advice. So for a political party, they have to disclose all gifts. For a party, a gift is anything received for no or less than adequate consideration. If it's an individual, say a parliamentarian or an MP, they're required to disclose gifts for a federal purpose. And federal purpose has a definition in the Act, which is related to electoral expenditure or communicating electoral matter. So it really does depend on who's doing the giving and the receiving and what the specific nature of the advice is as to whether it's related to that parliamentary purpose.
Thank you, that's helpful. Are you aware whether either the Coalition as a party or the LNP, I guess more specifically, or any particular parliamentarian, perhaps the opposition in whatever Ted O'Brien's portfolio is, I can't remember the name, but I think he's the guy that keeps banging on about nukes. Are you aware whether those disclosures have been made?
I'm not aware, no.
No? Okay. And what
so
time?
we published in February the disclosures for the 23-24.
Yes, okay, so anything after that obviously is not coming
is not yet disclosed.
Until next
yes.
Feb. Okay, thank you. Minister, do you have a view on whether this modelling should have instead been done by the Independent Parliamentary Budget Office?
Which modelling, Senator?
Frontier Economics modelling of the Coalition's nuclear policy.
Surely that's an issue for the Coalition as to how they seek to model their crazy programs.
Okay, you don't think that's something that the Parliamentary Budget Office should have oversight of, given that they cost various pre-election commitments?
I wouldn't have them wasting their time on a policy like that, Senator.
Okay. Great. Well, I will move on to my final lot of questions. There was an article published in the Klaxon publication recently which catalogues in some detail the change in what's disclosed on the Transparency Register. And the article contends that the AEC has pulled tens of thousands of donor returns from its transparency portal and is now only providing what it says is highly redacted versions of the once public documents from which it's blacked out key information. And it goes on to contend that the reason for this was that apparently a 5-year-old error saw the postal addresses of a handful of electoral candidates who were silent voters disclosed. And in fixing that error, it contends that the AEC pulled all disclosure forms from the register and has now essentially redacted all address information from every donor, even where it's just a PO box or a company's registered address. So can I just ask Mr. Pope or perhaps yourself, Mr. Reid, I'm not sure who, can you run us through, is that correct, and why the kind of over-cautious approach there, which this author contends is now meaning that there's far less transparency of who's paying what to whom?
So, Senator, in May of last year, we had a very unfortunate discovery of a privacy breach, which we took very seriously. And how that came about effectively was there was addresses that had been provided to us at the time that they were provided. They weren't attached to a sign elector, but the elector has then since become a sign elector, and that change of election of silent status has not been able to flow through our transparency register because of the age of that system and also the retrospective nature. There was tens of thousands of PDF documents sitting in the transparency register, which I think went back to the late 1990s. So we had this IT challenge and privacy challenge with respect to trying to actually tidy that up. We had an independent report done by Mr. Tony Shan. He's made a number of recommendations and we're well progressed in implementing those recommendations. One of which was to try and address this issue and to try and protect the privacy of individuals, but also particularly the privacy and security of those that have got silent elector status, was to remove addresses from the information that we publish. And that was codified in the technical amendments that were passed by Parliament and went to Executive Council last week.
So is it just silent electors now that don't have their address published? It's just, obviously I've got no problem with that, but the article seems to imply that every single donor disclosure form, even if you're a company and therefore don't have a home address as such, and you're clearly not an elector, this article is saying it's actually a very broad-reaching reduction. Is that correct or not?
I think the best way to put it is we are publishing all of the information that we receive on the transparency register, but for the address.
Even if it's a PO box of a company?
Yeah, I think that's the easiest way for us to manage this is actually not to have an address field on the transparency register.
Is that because it's technologically easier for you to manage? Why do you say it's the easiest way for you to manage?
Well, I just think it's for all donors. I'm happy for you to correct me here.
Yeah, I think the key, yes, the Commissioner has explained the decision we took when the issue happened, but as the Commissioner has explained, the recent legislation passed by the Parliament means that the AEC is not required to publish any addresses. So we are required to publish information from returns other than an address. And that came into effect immediately on royal assent. Most of those reforms don't come into effect for some time, but that came into effect immediately. So the AEC is now no longer required, and our understanding is that does have retrospective effect. So no returns, those PDF forms, will be published.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if the Minister's been following the discussion that we've just had, but I can certainly see the policy reason behind reducting individuals' addresses, individual donor addresses, and certainly silent elector addresses. But when a donor is a corporation or some other kind of body, corporate structure, I don't see the harm in publicising the company's registered address or the PO box. It's not identifying where anybody lives, or it's not identifying the individual. So, Minister, can you perhaps run through what the policy reason was for reducting absolutely every donor's address, even when they're a corporate or an organisation?
I'd have to take that question on notice, Senator.
Okay.
I think we just didn't. I think, Senator, from our perspective, we just didn't discriminate. There was just no addresses, and much of that information that you're referring to in terms of corporate addresses is readily available through a range of other sources. So I'm not sure that it actually leaves a really big gaping hole in terms of transparency and people understanding who has provided the donation from a corporate perspective.
Okay, so you think they could just search and find the address anyway and work out
for corporations, yeah. There's a range of other resources that are readily available for people to ascertain that information.
Okay, all right, well, I'll think on that and may come back in future. I think that's all I've got. Thank you. Good luck with the election.
Thank you, Senator Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, Mr Pope, we've discussed authorisations an awful lot at previous estimates. I promise we won't go over old ground, other than to ask you for an undertaking that all content in the that the Electoral Commission issues will be properly authorised at this election.
Yes, Senator, we've reflected on the feedback and we are working very hard to try and achieve that outcome.
Terrific. And that means then that other participants will be safe when looking at the AEC as a model of how to properly authorise their own materials?
That is absolutely what we're aiming for.
Excellent. It's exactly what I wanted to hear. Acting Commissioner, it's also my understanding that corporate entities that are in receipt of donations on behalf of a candidate are required to register as an associated entity or a significant third party under the Commonwealth Electoral Act. That's correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Can you explain to the committee why it's important for these entities to register if they're in receipt of donations for a third party?
To enable transparency, Senator.
And where would they be registered? Where would these entities be registered?
On the Transparency Register.
On the Transparency Register.
Once we were satisfied that they are required to be registered as such.
And it's a requirement of the Electoral Act that that Transparency Register be kept up to date?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Is it correct that the penalties for failing to register an entity on the Transparency Register is a civil penalty of about $66,000? Well, actually $66,000, not about. Or 3 times any amount these corporate entities have fundraised or electoral expenditure that they have incurred, whichever is higher. Is that correct? Is that your understanding?
That's my understanding of the stated penalty in the Act, yes.
So, Acting Commissioner, as you know, I've written to you regarding 4 entities that I'm advised have been established specifically for the purpose of benefiting candidates of the upcoming election, but have avoided registration as they are required to under the Commonwealth Electoral Act. Those 4 entities are the Arachna Murray Bartlett Independent Proprietary Limited, which is established 16th of December 2024, and that's operating for the benefit of Akana, I should say, Akana Murray Bartlett, the independent candidate for McPherson. There's another entity called the Monash Independent Proprietary Limited that was established on the 11th of September 2024, operating for the benefit of Deb Leonard, who is the independent candidate for Monash. There's another entity called the Wannon Independent Proprietary Limited, established on the 16th of December 2024, operating for the benefit of Alex Dyson, independent candidate for Wannon. And Forest Independent Proprietary Limited, established 22nd of August 2024, operating for the benefit of Susan Chapman, the independent candidate for Forest. It would be correct that on the face of it, these entities are established, and I'm using the phrase very specifically here, wholly or to a significant extent for the benefit of one or more disclosure entities, and the benefit relates to one or more electoral activities, which would then define them as an associated entity. Is that correct?
On the face of it, it would seem that that's a reasonable starting proposition.
Well, it's not as if they've been set up to benefit anyone else other than the candidate that has declared. It's in their names, yeah?
Yes, that's right.
Can I confirm that you have commenced looking into the arrangements for these entities?
Senator, we've started to look into those. And I appreciate you bringing those to our attention. We had already initiated some inquiries with respect to a few of those, but I'll be able to come back to you with a bit more once we've completed our inquiries.
Okay, terrific. Is it true, and my understanding, is it right, that they have to immediately cease accepting donations or recurring electoral expenditure until they've been added to the Transparency Register?
Yes, Senator.
It is?
Yes, that's correct.
That might come as a shock. In relation to incurring electoral expenditure for the benefit of the hearing, I can say that as of the 7th of February 2025, Meta shows the following expenditure. Okana Murray Bartlett for McPherson, $57,184. Deb Leonard for Monash, $24,670. Alex Dyson for Wannon, $43,571. And Susan Chapman for Forest, $11,955. Is it also correct that the law will require the entities to provide a retrospective annual return for the previous financial year within 30 days of registering?
If that's electoral expenditure, yes.
What else do you think it might be?
Well, sometimes we see these entities advertising their own entity, and sometimes we see them also promoting that entity or also promoting meetings. So it will depend on the nature of the advertising that we will need to. That's what we'll need to examine.
Where do you think it's going to leave people that have donated to these entities should the entities not register? What happens?
Well, as in they've donated money believing that it's for a particular candidate.
But then that organisation hasn't registered.
Well, I imagine they're going to be reasonably disappointed, particularly as we get more deeply involved. But also those that have donated may also have a requirement to submit a donor return as well.
So those donors may also potentially suffer penalties.
Well, potentially, if they've donated above the threshold.
So what are the penalties for people who donate illegally to illegally established electoral entities that are done specifically to avoid transparency?
Well, Senator, I mean, as you know, we generally take an approach of actually trying to achieve disclosure. So we'd be working with those donors to try and actually get them to do their declaration at the right time. Those declarations aren't going to be due for some time, so there's a bit of time for us and for them to
get their house in order.
Try and achieve that disclosure.
Let that be a warning from the AEC. I have one more line of questioning, Chair. I want to ask, I want to ask some questions in relation to the failure to disclose a donation or a gift to the AEC, which obviously would be a serious contravention of the Electoral Act. Am I correct that the penalty for failing to disclose is a civil penalty of up to 3 times any amount that was not disclosed?
Yes.
And receiving a donation from a foreign donor, what's a penalty for that?
I haven't got that off the top of my head. I might have to ask one of my subject matter experts with respect to that.
So what are the standard procedures that you would recommend candidates and political parties undertake at a minimum to ensure that they're checking on whether they have received money from a foreign donor?
Well, they are required to have an acknowledgement from the donor that the donor is not a foreign donor. They ought to be checking the addresses of those that are donating to try and make sure that those addresses are not from a foreign country and that they are Australian addresses. So through those checks, the parties and candidates ought to be assuring themselves that donors are coming from Australia.
I ask because I note that Tina Brown, the candidate for Barawa, and Nicolette Boll, the candidate for Bradfield, have similar websites that look to solicit donations, and I note that there appears to be no obvious mechanism that would prevent a foreign citizen donating on those websites. Donors are asked for their personal details. The country is a field that is a drop-down option that does not prevent people from nominating another country other than Australia. And I note that it appears to be no verification that the information provided is consistent with an individual on the electoral roll. So, for example, you could nominate, someone could nominate their details to be Vladimir Putin from Moscow, and then they wouldn't be prevented from donating. It's been put to me by a member of the public that this may have actually occurred. So should we be concerned about auditing of these types of donation schemes that have no check or balance?
And these are the sort of matters that we also pick up in our compliance reviews, Senator, from time to time also. So, again, I thank you for sharing that information with us, and that's something that we'll inquire into. But my recommendation would be for anyone who's receiving donations is to have adequate controls in place to make sure that they're not receiving foreign donations.
Acting Commissioner, as you know, I've written to you in relation to another matter. It was in relation to more entities that appear to have failed to disclose donations and may have inappropriately taken donations from foreign entities through a deliberate scheme. I refer specifically to 2 organisations, the Sunrise Project and GetUp, who both appear to have failed to have disclosed relevant donations and may have facilitated and received foreign donations. Would this be of concern to the Commission?
Well, Senator, once again, thank you for writing to us and bringing that to our attention. And I concur with your language that they may have, and that's something that we're going to have to inquire into. I don't know that, I can't draw any conclusions on the face of the information that you've provided. The only thing I would say is that occasionally we do get returns where, or situations where donors are required to provide their all of the amount that they've received, and they put it into two buckets: the donation that they've received for electoral expenditure and other receipts, which is not anything to do with electoral expenditure. So occasionally we do get situations where there are large amounts of money declared in other receipts because they are required to declare it, but it has nothing to do with electoral expenditure. So that is an avenue of inquiry that we'd need to examine.
I note that the founder and the executive director of the Sunrise Project, Mr. John Hepburn, has previously outlined efforts that he has undertaken to avoid disclosing overseas sources of funds. And in an email sent to a foreign funder and Hillary Clinton's campaign chairperson, Mr. Hepburn wrote that, and I'm quoting him here, "We have a strategy session with our lawyers and board on Thursday to plan out our response. As part of this, we are seeking advice on steps we might take to avoid disclosure, challenge and limit disclosure, or ensure that any disclosure is limited to the committee members and is not made public. I do have concerns about the potential PR impact of disclosure of both our funding and grantees." Now, I find this concerning, and I'm sure you do too, that an individual and an organisation directed by Mr. Hepburn are potentially facilitating foreign donations and is intentionally designing a scheme to avoid transparency in Australia. So will the AUC commit to looking into this matter?
We will look into this matter, Senator.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pope. I have one very, very brief question, and then I will hand to my colleague, if I can, Chair. Can the AUC provide an update on the preparations for the Electoral Integrity Task Force to prevent foreign interference in the electoral system?
Well, Senator, as always, in the lead up to an election and for every election since 2018, the Electoral Integrity Assurance Task Force is active. It's come together. It's escalating its level of meetings and activity, and it's poised and ready to go. And all of the agencies that make up that task force have access to, through their statutory responsibilities and powers, access to relevant information and material, and with respect to foreign interference in particular, a few of those agencies. And that will be shared amongst the task force for us to very closely monitor.
I know you and I have had this conversation before, and we've also had the conversation with your predecessor, Mr. Rogers, that this is going to be an election conducted in the context of artificial intelligence, and the use of AI by foreign actors has been a potential risk that has been identified. So what are the measures that you've put in place to keep the system protected from that influence?
Look, with respect to artificial intelligence, I mean, we continue to work closely with the social media companies and the Electoral Integrity Assurance Task Force, and also our Defending Democracy unit is engaging with social media companies very closely. We're actually in the process of undergoing a number of exercises with those social media companies. And, you know, I've also written to those social media companies to seek their commitment to uphold the Munich Accord that they all signed in 2024, last year, with respect to artificial intelligence and making sure that you know, they are addressing those issues on their platforms.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Pope. Exciting times ahead. I know Senator McGrath has some questions.
Thank you. Can you explain what happens if an election is called before the Northern Territory redistribution is finalised?
So the redistribution for the Northern Territory will be gazetted on Tuesday the 4th of March. If the election is called prior to that, then the election will be conducted on its current boundaries. If the election's called after, then it will be after the 4th of March, and it will be conducted on the new boundaries that have been redistributed.
And so if the Prime Minister goes to the Governor-General a week today it's on the current boundaries. If he goes a week tomorrow, it's on the new boundaries.
Yes.
Okay. In relation to the federal direct enrolment updates, what it was called FDEUs, can I get a copy of the breakdown of self-enrolments and FDEUs by electorate from the 2000 federal election to the most recent date that you have the information for?
Yes, Senator. Just so I'm clear, from the 2022 federal election, did you say?
Yes.
Yes.
I did write to you on the 5th of December. I don't know if I've got it. I don't think I've received a response yet. So you may have sent it, but if you might want to just check the records there. And also, obviously this is on notice, how many people have been added to the electoral roll to the FDU who did not have a home address? If you could do that, I'd answer that also. And I have, as I said, I did write to you, so you may be able to respond to my letter rather than on notice, because it may not go through the Minister's office. You'll have to. Do you have to put your questions on notice to the Minister's office?
Oh, questions on notice, yes.
Yes. Well, perhaps if you reply to my letter, if I get a response to the letter or an update to the letter, that would get around any delays there. What is the practical escalation process for non-violent voter intimidation?
Well, look, Senator, I mean, I guess let me say at the outset, 99% of all Australians do the right thing and behave incredibly well and appropriately and celebrate Australia's wonderful democracy, but we do get the occasional person that does not. We will be briefing our staff with respect to how to manage security incidents, and we have an escalation process and an incident management framework within the AEC. Our staff will be instructed to, in most instances, particularly matters that occur outside of the 6 metres to the polling place, will be to call the local police. I have written last week to the commissioners of all police forces, raising with them the security environment in which the election may well be delivered, and also outlining to them a number of electoral offences. And one of those is, if I can just find it in my notes, is section 327 of the Electoral Act, which is interfering with a political liberty, where a person shall not hinder or interfere with the free exercise or performance by any other person of any political right or duty that is relevant to an election under this Act. Now, that's a Commonwealth offence, so we'd be looking to work with the Australian Federal Police with respect to that. So it's going to largely depend on the circumstances. We would hope that in most instances, any incident, as rare as that is, can be diffused and managed locally, but I'm not going to ask my staff to put themselves in harm's way and be heroes. I'm going to ask them to call the police in the first instance.
Okay. Good, thank you. What is the greatest risk to the smooth running of the upcoming federal election?
Look, I think there's a few, Senator. I mean, firstly, we can't control the weather, so floods, cyclones, late onset of wet season, extraordinary heat waves, those sorts of things could still be occurring in the next month or 2 months whenever the election's likely to occur. So we're going to have to try and negotiate our way through whatever's served up from a weather perspective. Then, of course, there is a security backdrop in which the election is being delivered, and I think the Director General of ASIO publicly outlined that last week, and I don't have anything else to add. I think he very clearly outlined some of the security challenges that we're all facing.
So the weather and security challenges would be the greatest risks.
They're two of the greatest risks that are very difficult for us to influence or to control. Most other things we're able to try and, some degree, influence and control.
And so you'd believe the AEC is ready for the upcoming federal election?
We've been ready for quite a while, Senator. We were ready late last year, just in case there was an early election. We've been maintaining that heightened state of readiness, and we are absolutely ready.
So we.
So, just going back to, thank you for that answer, by the way. Just going back to when there's non-violent voter intimidation. What would I tell my booth captains? What should we tell booth captains and people who are participating in the democratic process, outside polling stations, that if a person is intimidating voters and is not harming anyone, so it's outside the view of the AFP and it's not within the 6 metre radius of the polling station. So, for example, what if they're circling the booth in a car with making heinous statements? What would your advice be?
Probably the same as my advice to my staff would be try and call the police to come and diffuse the situation as best that's possible.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Actually, I've got one question for you, Minister, before the AEC goes. I see that Zali Stegel has an additional staffer compared on the staffing table that you tabled so kindly. That
technically,
I know, but the minister is
time slot. Right
I know,
now,
but the minister is a
Senator
very
McGrath.
generous minister. That in October, Ms. Stegel had one advisor, and now she has two advisors. You decided to double the member for Warringah's staffing?
I don't personally make those decisions, Senator. Those decisions are made by the Prime Minister, and for particular reasons, individual members of Parliament do get extra allocations, and on that occasion the Prime Minister decided, as you know, I've got a close relationship with Ms. Stegel after the recent discussions about electoral reform, and I understand that a decision was made to increase her staff by the Prime Minister.
What are they?
I'm happy to inquire as to what the reason for that was.
I don't even take it on notice.
I'll take it on notice. And if that is the last question, I might ask Mr Pope to tell us how many Australians are on the roll for this election.
Thanks, Minister. As at the end of January, 17,965,000 electors are on the electoral roll, which is an enrolment rate of 97.9%, which I think is our greatest and largest enrolment rate ever in Australia's history. And we would love to see that hit 18 million by close of rolls. It's going to be a bit of a challenge, but we very much hope that that's the case.
Repeat the number again for me, Mr Pope.
17,965,000 electors.
How many more super citizenship ceremonies will it take?
I don't know, Senator. We're working our way through the ones that we've been asked to assist.
We'll do our best to get it up.
Thank you. I've just got
18.
one last question, and I don't know yet if this will be my last estimates. It depends if we have our further estimates before the middle of the year. But I want to thank the AEC. And in asking my last question, when you look at major risks to the election, I'm still somewhat scarred by my experience in 2013-14 when the Electoral Commission lost 1,500 votes. And so I guess when you're looking at potential risks to the election, I guess I'm just also asking you on the record what preparations you've made to ensure that such events also don't occur.
Senator, that's entirely reasonable given what you went through in 2013, and we've completely and fundamentally overhauled the way in which we secure and manage and track and trace our ballot papers since 2013. We did that very quickly coming out of the 2013 election for the 2014 rerun, and then we've further matured that every election ever since. So we have a comprehensive ballot paper tracking, monitoring from the time the blank ballot paper hits the printer all the way through to the time it goes into long-term storage. We track and monitor every ballot paper through a whole range of different controls and measures.
So you'll know if any are missing
We will
quicker.
know.
Well, you did know, the AEC did know last time that they were missing, they just could not find them.
That's right.
But yeah, thank you very much for that overview and for your evidence this afternoon, and best wishes with the upcoming election.
Thank you.
That concludes our hearing this evening. I'd like to thank everybody who has given evidence today. Can we dismiss IPIA? Oh, we've still got PWS and IPIA. So how about I call them to the table together, if that's okay? Thank you. I'm sorry if I would not have taken up so much time in that last couple of moments. Good evening. I welcome Ms Leonie McGregor, CEO and other officers of the Workplace Support Service, as well as Ms Christina Grant, CEO and other officers of IPIA. Welcome to your very first estimates. As you can tell by the time, we won't have much time for questioning, but it's really important that you have a chance to introduce yourself to the committee. Under normal circumstances, it being your first estimates, you may have provided an opening statement in person to warm yourself up, but we will be adjourning at 11 o'clock or not long after. So, did any of you have opening statements you wanted to give or table?
Not from us.
Great.
Thank you. No.
Thank you. Senator Hume.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start with PWSS. Welcome, Ms Grant, by the way, but I'll start with PWSS. I just want to confirm that PWSS is a confidential service, Ms McGregor.
Yes, Senator, it is. So, Leonie McGregor, the CEO of PWSS. It is a confidential service.
And what training do your staff undertake to ensure that they appreciate the confidentiality in conducting their role?
I might pass that question on to Kate.
Thank you. Kate Warnemaker, Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the PWSS. Staff are regularly reminded of their obligations in relation to confidentiality. They also sign a conflict of interest which talks about that, and they provide an undertaking before they're engaged in relation to complying with confidentiality, and they are, as I said, regularly reminded, and we do constantly talk about the very significant importance of confidentiality with the service.
And do you engage with other Commonwealth agencies or organisations how to manage risk to confidentiality when it comes to handling documents or exchanging documents with external parties or providing information to participants?
We do, and we certainly do in relation to the Department of Parliamentary Services, which provides our ICT, and so we talk about that with them in relation to the exchange of material.
And what do you do if there is an inadvertent breach of confidentiality?
Yes, unfortunately, Senator, I mean, we are all human, and there is the possibility of human error despite how seriously we take confidentiality. We have a data breach plan which we activate immediately once we become aware if something has happened.
And how quickly do you inform a participant of a breach, and how would you go about that?
As quickly as possible. We sometimes would take advice in relation to it, so potentially from an external law firm in relation to the matter, and the best way to approach it. But we would personally ring them first if we have their number or some contact details.
So it's a call, it's not an email?
No, it's a call from one of our counselling and support officers, particularly if we have that contact. If we're able to obtain that contact detail, we would do that.
And how do you go about, thank you, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. How do you go about remediating any breach so that you can ensure that third parties didn't inappropriately use information that they might have been given?
Our data breach response plan has 4 phases, as they usually do, and I should say that this has also been drafted by an external firm. And we contain the breach as much as possible, so contact the person where we understand that there has been a breach and ask them to delete the material and confirm that they have deleted it. And then we assess what the situation is. So that happens as quickly as possible. And then we assess the situation and whether people need to be notified in relation to the breach and whether it's a possible notifiable data breach, which needs to be assessed as well. And then we notify affected people and we will continue to engage with those people and explain what is happening and what we've done in relation to the breach. And then obviously the final step is reviewing our processes to, as much as possible, reduce the chance of it occurring again.
Is there any form of redress that's available to individuals where their privacy or their confidentiality has been breached by the PWSS?
I think, Senator, we would follow the protocols in relation to the breach. Unfortunately, there would be some circumstances, I'm sure, where once the breach has occurred, it has occurred. And there's no kind of taking it back. I think it would depend on the circumstances around recourse, probably on a particular, on the particular context.
How can you assure the committee that breaches of confidentiality and privacy will be minimised in the future?
So we do everything we can to minimise breaches of confidentiality. I think, as Ms Wandermaker has said, we can never eliminate that risk. We can do many, many things to mitigate the risk, which is what we do. And we do have, whilst we have that privacy breach plan in place, we also regularly assess our risks. We have a risk assessment framework, and we every fortnight we look at that framework to see what are our particular risks. That is one of our highest risks, the risk of confidentiality being breached, so it is constantly in our minds, and we just have to continue to work on making sure that as much as possible we have reduced that risk. We can never eliminate it. Unfortunately, there are situations where people may inadvertently and without any intention of doing so make a mistake. I just can't promise that will never happen.
I just want to quickly ask about the IPSC, which my understanding is it's now fully established within the PWSS.
Yes.
I just want to know that in establishing the IPSC that the Commission has been provided with appropriate staff and administrative support.
Yes, we are continuing to assess that as well. As you know, when it was first established, it was a little bit of a guess around how much work or how little work it may have. And so as it is becoming more, firmly established and progressing with work, we're continually assessing how it is that that Commission is supported. It's become clear, I think, that the complexity of the framework that we are dealing with, that's both the IPSC and the PWSS, perhaps was not appreciated at the time the organisations were established, and so I think that we will, and the IPSC will probably be looking to adjust our resourcing in the future in some ways. Many of the matters that we're dealing with are very complex, and so need the appropriate response and the appropriate staff to do that well.
Thank you, Ms McGregor. I will have some more questions for you on this at the next estimates.
Oh, goody.
I have one question for IPIA if they
Yes,
are.
no, that would be great.
I don't want to make you feel left out, Ms Grant. That would be very unfair. Obviously, IPIA sees considerable travel and expenditure claims during elections. I want to know whether work has commenced on providing guidance to parliamentarians and staff on their travel and expenditure during an election period, and if it has been started, when it will be finalised.
Thank you, Senator. Christina Grant, IPIA CEO. Work has definitely commenced to prepare us for the election travel and make sure that we are well placed to provide advice to parliamentarians and their staff. I would point out that there is no special travel provisions for the election. The normal travel provisions apply just like they do on any other parliamentary arrangement. The principles continue to apply to parliamentarians and the requirements of the MOPS Act continue to apply to staff. But the advice that we have prepared for the election takes into account the unique circumstances that are around and make sure that staff and parliamentarians are well placed to make good decisions around their travel. And we are always here to provide advice. Call us, email us. We're happy to provide advice if there is any confusion or anybody's unsure about their travel arrangements.
And in your opinion, do you think the advice is going to be consistent with the advice that's provided in previous elections, particularly during the last election?
Yeah, largely the same. We did do a lessons learnt at the end of the last election process, and there were some minimal insights, and obviously there's some changes to the determinations, and those have all been taken into account. But we'll be emailing all parliamentarians with some guidelines, some guidance material, and making sure they're aware of the advice function of IPIA should they require it.
Thank you, Ms Grant. What a good first hit out. I'm sure all the journalists will write it up.
Thank you, Senators, and thank you everyone for your indulgence.
Senator, you jumped the gun a little bit earlier in referring to this perhaps being your last chairing of the committee, but I want to thank you for the professional way in which you have conducted these meetings. And if it is in fact your last...
well, I've got a whole week to go, but
no,
perhaps I will miss you terribly, Senator Farrell.
I'm talking SMOS in particular. But can I wish you all the very best for your future career.
Thank you, Minister. That's deeply appreciated. And I thank everyone who's given evidence today and over many preceding years. We will now adjourn until the morning, where we will commence again with the Department of Finance, I believe.